When can I eat raw foods, Marie? Am I able to eat any raw? You said cooked foods are better, and I should eat mostly cooked foods. What about raw foods? Can I have raw foods at all? Well, in today's video, we're going to be talking about that. So if you have dampness, if you have spleen qi deficiency, if you think you have those things or you're not sure, then stay tuned on this video and we're going to talk about the benefit of eating a mostly cooked foods diet, why you should be doing that, but also when could I have raw foods? Like, are raw foods appropriate for some kinds of people or certain seasons? That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. If you haven't subscribed already, make sure you click that subscribe button and the notification bell. I'm doing some live streams lately, and so if you click the notification bell, you'll be notified when I go live, and if it suits you, you can jump on, you can ask your questions, and have them answered instantaneously on the live stream. So let's get on with the video. I'm super excited about what we're going to talk about today. So your stomach likes three things. It likes warm, it likes moist, and it likes cooked. Welcome back to the Chinese Medicine Podcast. My name is Marie Hopkinson. I'm a herbalist and an acupuncturist in Perth, Western Australia, and coming at you through YouTube and the internet, and welcome to all our audio listeners as well. Today's episode is a very important video that I've made a few times in lots of different ways. We're going to talk about the fundamentals of digestion and why it's so important in Chinese medicine to eat more cooked than raw foods, and when is it appropriate to even eat raw foods, let's say. Now, this might be important if you've got a diagnosis like spleen qi deficiency, a practitioner has told you that you might have dampness, that you might have yang deficiency, spleen yang deficiency. These are the kinds of symptoms that you might get are like, bloating or feeling very tired. You might feel your bowels might not be properly formed, so you could have like loose stools. The kinds of gut problems can be associated with these diagnoses as well. So a diagnosis in Chinese medicine isn't one in the same in Western medicine, but these can be common things. And the only way you're going to get that proper diagnosis is to see a practitioner, to see a herbalist or an acupuncturist and get a proper diagnosis. So on this channel, what I do is I try to break down the ideas and the concepts of Chinese medicine, make it really easy to understand for any old person. If you're a student of Chinese medicine, that's great. But if you're not a student, you're just a person that wants to know a bit more, wants to help your body with this ancient Chinese medicine wisdom. That's what this channel is about. So I highly recommend people to go and see a practitioner. It's hard to give yourself a diagnosis, almost impossible, right? That's why practitioners do a 4-year degree in acupuncture or herbs, just to understand the theory and the ideas of Chinese medicine. So let's talk about why cooked foods are important. And when could you eat raw foods? Because this is a question I get a lot from my patients. Like, Marie, is it okay for me to ever have raw foods? And so you might have even seen my video that I've done on this channel called Why Eat Mostly Cooked Foods. It's the most popular video that I've done. And in that video, I'll give you a little rundown of what we talk about there. So the idea is that your digestive system belongs to the two organs in Chinese medicine of the earth element, your spleen and your stomach. Now, something to just consider on the side is that these are systems of functions, not the individual organs themselves, right? So yes, your stomach, your physical stomach, is the organ that receives the food. But in Chinese medicine, when they say your spleen digests the food, well, it doesn't really in Western medicine. And this is where it can get very confusing for people. And sometimes people can just be completely put off by the system and think, well, that just doesn't make sense. It must be all nonsense and woo-woo. But it's just a different way of thinking about things. And really what we're saying when we talk about the spleen, so we're going to talk about the earth element functions here to just make it a little bit more easier to explain and understand. It's the idea that your body has a powerhouse of resource to be able to separate pure and impure foods that go into the stomach that you eat. So really your earth element is about the ability of your body to digest the food. So you have to put the right stuff in to begin with. And that's where the cooked foods comes in, because what it's doing is it's kind of pre-digesting it. There's this idea in Chinese medicine that the net gain of your digestive system should be more, like you should gain more energy than it takes up actually doing the job of digestion. So it takes up energy to digest food. It takes up energy just to live. It takes up energy to be who you are and to do all those processes. And some foods are harder to digest than others. Now, what's harder to digest? So things that are very dense, there's lots of flavors mixed in together, and there's lots of concentrated nutrition. Unfortunately, a lot of the delicious, yummy foods that are packaged foods are those harder to digest foods. And sometimes what you'll find is like the net gain is so low compared to the ability to digest them. So what that means is you, like trans fats foods are a really good example of, you could eat like a whole packet of snack food and then you still feel hungry. You're not really satisfied because your body's like, hey, where are the nutrients that are going to supply me for the energy for the day? Your mind feels like you've eaten something because you've put food into your mouth, but then your gut is like saying, this is really hard to digest, and you might have some symptoms like diarrhea or loose stools or bloating or feeling sick even. Now, sometimes when you're younger, you don't get those symptoms. You just don't feel it because you've got tons of yang, or you could think of it in TCM as Jing essence. You've got tons of that. And so you've got all this resource behind you, and it doesn't really matter what you do to your body in terms of symptom-wise. Like, you don't notice the symptoms of it because you've got all this resource. But in a Chinese medicine sense, we're thinking, well, you're consuming that resource so that you don't have those symptoms. But then one day when you don't have that much resource, what happens then? Well, that's when people wake up and they say, well, I just started getting these symptoms. I went to the doctor and he said I've got irritable bowel syndrome, or I've got chronic fatigue, or I've got, a combination of these kinds of things, or just, even like leaky gut syndrome or things like this, where you might have, you're wanting a diagnosis, but there's just a syndrome that you've got because there's no actual definitive diagnosis of what's going on with your bowels and those kinds of things. So let's get back to this idea of cooked foods. Why are cooked foods important? So your stomach likes three things. It likes warm, it likes moist, and it likes cooked. And your stomach dislikes the opposite of that. It dislikes cold, it dislikes dry, and it dislikes raw. So does that mean we can never have those things? Can I never have raw foods, Marie? What about carrots? What about salad? What about those yummy smoothies that I love to have? So the answer is you can have some raw, but your predominant diet should be warm, should be moist, should be cooked. And if you stick to that kind of a diet in general, or if you, let's say you've had a really frivolous time, or you've eaten too much hard to digest food, or you feel like you've had a lot of dampening foods, right? So you might have had a lot of parties. This is very common after a birthday weekend, or it might turn into a birthday month, or lots and lots of functions, or Christmas time, or something like that. And you feel like, I need a detox. I need to kind of get back on the rails. I need to get my body healthy. So what would you do? You would go onto something that's predominantly warm, something that's predominantly cooked, predominantly moist. So you're staying away from cold, dry, and raw foods as much as you can. And then you can start to introduce those foods back in once you feel better. So by feeling better, what are we saying? Well, when the bloating goes away, when you feel like, there's less bloating, when you feel like your bowels are regular. So how are your bowels regular? Should be properly formed stools. They should be easy to come out, not sort of a lot of pushing or a lot of taking a lot of time to go. And you should generally go once a day and maybe twice a day, but it should be a regular time. So perfect bowel movements would be sort of feeling an urge that you need to go, and it's at a regular time every day. You pass your bowel motions, and there's not a lot of wiping, and it easily comes out in what we would call like a soft sausage. Now I know that's a little bit probably too much information for some people. Shouldn't be like a strange smell or a strange colour or something like that. Now you can pay attention to your bowel movements associated with what you eat. So if you predominantly have a healthy digestive system and your bowels are regular, and then you go out, and you have something different that you normally wouldn't have to eat, then you might notice your bowels, change. So that's normal. Your body's reacting to the food that you had. And especially if they go back to how they were after you stop having that food, or you didn't have that again, let's say, because it was just a one-off thing. Well, great, your body's reacted and it's been able to digest that. And that's kind of telling you that there was something in that food that was either very hard to digest, or it was like, maybe if it was a curry, let's say, it was way too hot, lots of hot and spicy can sometimes cause people to have that. Or sometimes if you change your habits in a drastic way, like let's say sometimes people change their jobs, and they find that they're no longer cooking their food at home. This might happen when you've changed from, a lot of people have been working from home and now they're going back to work, or maybe vice versa. And you might find that because you're working from home, well, I can cook all my food and I suddenly feel heaps better because I can have more control over what I'm eating. Whereas when you're out, if it's normal to be busy. Like sometimes you wake up in the morning like, I've got to get to work, and you forget to bring your lunch with you, or you didn't have time to make it. and you just, then you're like, well, it's 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock, I've got to eat something. So you go to the cafe and you have something that you normally wouldn't have, maybe bread or, you know, something that's just an unusual thing, maybe even a pie or a sausage roll or something like that. And so these kinds of foods are okay as occasional foods, right? But if you have those foods all the time, then that's what can sometimes cause the difficult to digest, hard to digest diet, and that can strain your spleen and stomach. So why are cooked foods important? Well, because they encourage that warmth of the digestive system. So if you imagine like your stomach as a cooking pot on the stove, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to make a soup. So if you were to do that, you'd need to turn the stove on, right? There's no point in putting the cooking pot there with the full of water. And if you don't turn the stove on, there's no heat, so it can't be transformed. You're never going to make a soup. So the heat or the element, let's say, or the fire below the pot is the equivalent of your spleen system, or it's that earth element digestive power of your body, right? The fire of your body, the yang, the functional ability of your spleen to what's called like separate the pure and the impure. So this idea of heating the food kind of causes this bubbling and boiling, or in some TCM books they describe it as a cauldron, you know, like that old double toil and trouble, you know, this sort of sitting over this cauldron. Imagine that bubbling, and you can smell the aromas that come from foods when they're cooked like that. So that kind of a process is going on in your digestive system. It's going on in your stomach when you're eating the food. And what's actually happening physiologically is your digestive acid, your stomach acid, is combining with the food and breaking that down and helping to break that up. So how can we assist that? Well, things that are already cooked take up less fire, less energy to digest it. And you'll know that if you've ever cooked anything before. If you're heating up something that's already been cooked, it doesn't take long to cook it. Whereas if you cook something from raw, it takes a lot longer to cook it. And so you could think of that as energy. Now, we don't usually have to pay for energy as we go, right, in our thing. We're not sort of, I mean, you might have had a camp stove, let's say, and you've only got a tiny bit of gas left. And you're like, well, what can I cook with this tiny bit of gas? That's all I've got. Or if you had to make a fire and you only had a certain amount of wood, you would be thinking, right, I don't want to waste a lot of energy cooking up this food because this is all that I've got. Now, our body doesn't have completely a finite resource. It does in a long-term sense. So we have, let's say we can live to 100 years, or, you know, possibly more if we are fortunate enough to live longer than that. But in Chinese medicine, they would think a human being should be able to live 100 healthy years. And so over time, of course, that resource declines. And every day you kind of still have, you know, if you're alive, you've got some resource there. So what I'm getting at is that if we think of this as much more precious than we kind of do, right? You don't think every day, most people don't think, well, I've only got a certain amount of resource, I better not waste it. But that's the idea of longevity in Chinese medicine. That's the idea of keeping our bodies healthy through, one, the predominant way is just not wasting the resource that we do have. And this doesn't just pertain to our digestive system, it pertains to our mental energy, it pertains to the energy that we give out into areas like physical energy. I'm not saying don't exercise, but the amount of energy you do expend on exercising, you know, is really important. To not waste energy. And that's the number one way that you want to, if you want to live 100 years, if you want to live a healthy amount of time, that's the first thing you want to do, right? And then you want to focus on, okay, now what am I putting into my body? So the first thing is, let's not waste the energy. Stop wasting your energy on the things that, you know, we're wasting energy on. I'm talking to myself as well. We all do it. It's just human nature. So you kind of need these kind of videos to remind you, as a good reminder to say, hey, stop wasting your energy on the things that we're wasting energy on. And so the warm, cooked and moist kind of diet promotes this function of the cooking pot on the stove. So if you imagine that you're cooking up a soup, let's say, and you've already cooked it, it's all beautifully cooked, and someone comes in the door and they smell it and they think, wow, that smells so good, I'm so hungry, I can smell the aromas because it's, you know, it's bubbled and boiled and the aromas have been released and people can smell it and it's ready to serve. And then someone goes and grabs a cup of cold water and puts that into the soup. So that will basically dilute all of the warmth that's in there. And so in order to get that back to that, you know, serving temperature, you generally turn the heat up on the stove to increase the heat so that it would quickly, you know, be ready to serve at that temperature you wanted to serve it at. And that's what it's like in our digestive system. If you put cold foods in, if you actually drink physically cold water, like, you know, cold drinks, icy cold drinks, your stomach has to turn up the heat, increase the acidity almost in some instances, depending on what you're actually eating. But turn up that digestive power, use more digestive power to assimilate it into, and it's a shock to your body as well. Every time I go to China, I'm always, I'm not surprised now, but I remember the first time I went, like, especially because you learn all this stuff in Chinese medicine. It's so not a part of our culture in a Western sense. Like, it's so much a part of my life now, I'm just used to it. But I remember studying these things and they were very foreign, and people were like, what? Why won't you drink some icy cold water? What's wrong with you? Why don't you want ice in your drink? And then I remember going to China the first couple of times, and it's just part of the culture, so much so that you wouldn't believe this. It's so much part of the culture that they do have like refrigerated drinks, let's say, right? So they sell Coke and Sprite and all these kinds of drinks, there. And they're very popular drinks as well. So let's say you go to a little deli shop and you go to get a cold or a drink. They turn the fridges off in wintertime because they think, well, it's already cold enough. You wouldn't want a cold drink. You certainly wouldn't want to drink. Like, this is for the whole population. This isn't people that believe in Chinese medicine or anything like that. It's just part of their culture that they don't drink cold drinks in winter. They just don't. And you can't even buy a cold drink. Anyone who's been to China, pop it in the comments below. You would know if you've been to China in the wintertime. Because I went with a business colleague once and he was like, I just want a cold Coke. I just want a cold drink. And I was like, well, you're not going to be able to get one now. Like, you know, we're here in wintertime, don't you? Just remember that. You have to take them back to your hotel room, put them in your own fridge. Because it's just how they do it, right? The same as like, I remember once my colleague got a cold when we were there. So he had a bit of a runny nose and he had a bit of a flu kind of coming on. And everywhere we went, they wouldn't give him any tea. They would only give him warm water. And normally when you go to these places, like you get tea, and people just give out tea. But there's this idea that, okay, if you've got a flu or a cold, or you're getting a bit of a gunmal, which is a cold symptom, right? You might have a runny nose or, you know, a bit of a cold. That you shouldn't have tea, you shouldn't have stimulants, right? No caffeine, no stimulants. You should just have warm water. They don't ask you if that's what you want. They just give it to you. But what I'm getting at is it's so ingrained in the culture there, because it's just been part of life for thousands and thousands of years, that it's kind of, that's the nature. And they don't think of it as how to be healthy. They just think of it as, well, that's just what we do, because that's what we do. So cold kind of things in winter are certainly worse for your body. They're certainly worse for you than cold things in summer. So, you know, your body it's trying to conserve its warmth. Like, I'm not saying cold drinks are good for you in summertime, but, you know, they're certainly not great for you in wintertime. So you want to try to apply this approach, because I want to answer this question in this video, like, can I ever have raw foods, Marie? And, you know, can I ever have cold foods? So in some seasons, yes. So if it's very hot versus very cold, so you've got, you know, summer and winter as two extremes, and depending on where you live in the world, they can be very extreme. Like, you can have, you know, freezing cold winter where it's snowing, and naturally your body wants to warm up. You feel like you come home and you're like, oh, I want to have a nice warm wintry stew to kind of warm myself up. And you don't kind of feel like that in summer, right? So it makes sense that you can have some raw foods mixed with the cooked foods. So this is what I advise to my patients in a general sense. If your body's unwell, and you know your digestive system's unwell, then stick to that warm, cooked and moist as much as you possibly can in all the seasons. If you're healthy and you're just watching this to stay healthy and keep healthy, then you can kind of vary it quite a lot in those different seasons. So some people can have some raw smoothies, like juices and raw smoothies and things like that in summertime, and they do okay with having that. If your body's healthy and you start doing those kinds of things, or you have been doing those things, you just want to monitor your bowels as the main aspect of it, and whether you have bloating. So if you have a raw smoothie, it might be the quantity of how much you're having or what's actually in it. Like, kale is a really not a good vegetable to have raw, even though it's somewhat popular to have that, because it can be very toxic having it raw. So if you cook it, it makes, you know, makes it much, if you cook it, it makes it much more easily digestible. So let's say it depends on what's going in the raw smoothie. the general idea with those kind of raw foods is if you can eat that fruit or that food naturally, then go for it and put it in a drink. But some people put all this stuff, like they have a bench full of fruit and vegetables and they think, oh, I'm going to make my super smoothie today and pack all this concentrated nutrition into this drink. And there's no humanly possible way that they would eat that food. Like they'd be sitting there trying to eat that peach and that apricot and that that avocado and that bag of spinach. They wouldn't be able to consume all of that food. So kind of think of it like that. So it's okay to dilute those things down, just put less in. I'm not saying you can never have raw smoothies or never have any raw stuff. So if your body's healthy, monitor how that's going. If you're getting a lot of diarrhea or loose stools from having that stuff, then back it off a little bit. Either stop having it or dilute it down or have it less often. You could try putting some ginger or cinnamon or something warm and pungent into the smoothie. That can help as well if you really, really need to have these things. And the other option is then to experiment with having the cooked foods with the raw foods. So let's say a salad with some cooked meats. So having something warm and cooked with your cold and raw. It actually, at the same time when you're eating that together, kind of helps you digest it. So I hope this video has been useful and helpful to you. And if it has, leave a comment in the comments below. I love to hear how this has helped people, or if you've got something you'd like to share, that's great. If you've got a question about Chinese medicine, don't forget to ask it. I'm happy to answer your questions. I'm also doing online consultations now. So I have my practice in Perth, Western Australia, but I realise that most of the people watching this are never going to come here, and it's impossible to travel at the moment as well. So what I'm doing is online Zoom consultations for people individually, one-on-one, and that's all the details for that are in the link in the description below. You can jump on my website and have a look at what I do if you'd like to have a chat with me one-on-one. I also do sometimes chats for students and stuff, overseas students that just want to talk about Chinese medicine things or have their questions answered or things like that in a private sense. We can do that as well. So I'm also doing some live streams. You might have noticed that on this channel. So I really have been having a lot of fun with that. And so watch out. Make sure you click that notification bell if you haven't already, and then you won't miss it. When I go live, you'll be notified. So that's super important if you're interested in that kind of stuff. The live streams are just at random times at the moment, whenever I've got the time to kind of do it during the week. So really appreciate you watching, and I hope this has been good for you, useful and helpful. And I look forward to seeing you again on the next video soon. Thank you.